There we go. It's live now. Okay. I just want to close this. Okay. Last week we had discussed the placement of medicine, the medicinal cream in the eye. We had talked about that as long as that was before Shabbos, that was okay. We talked about that happens if you turn the water on in the garden before Shabbos and then it continues to run throughout Shabbos, it's fine. And the last thing we had discussed was about the issue of mimareach, of smoothing over with particularly with a thick cream. On Shabbos, it would be an issue. Again, before Shabbos, it would not be an issue, even though the sub aspect of the malacha might be taking place on Shabbos, or better yet, in this case, also the refuah was taking place on Shabbos, and we will discuss when we get there. There's a whole simon that relates to refuah. No, we didn't. We were waiting. Going to go right a second. Yeah. Okay. 1 second. Hold on, my friends. We have halacha lamasa. We're just gonna do forms. Google. Halacha lamasa. We're just repairing the one of the forms for chametz. It's a long count. This looks like it's the one. This is the one? That's what it looks like with the responses. Okay. Okay, so there's nothing. Right?
There should be a checkbox, just one checkbox.
Let's write something here. Actually trying to release it, but it keeps coming back.
It was right at the end.
Right, by checking this box, I hereby authorize. How about I authorize?
Hmm?
Done. Let's see here. Now let's
Now go live.
let's see what it looks like. Preview.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay. Okay, we fixed it. All right, sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay, so where we left off now is with mugmar. So we're on the second line on page where it says Yud Tet at the top left-hand corner, and we're going to discuss the topic of mugmar. I'll explain what that is in just a moment. So the Shulchan Aruch says V'laseis mugmar tachas hakelim. If you were to place mugmar underneath the kelim, I'll explain what that is in a moment. V'heim misgamrim me'aleihem kol haShabbos, and then it does its job over the entirety of Shabbos, then it's okay. Now, what's mugmar? So you learned Maseches Brachos at the end of the end of the meal in the times of the Talmud. It was not uncommon that they would place a actually the Mishnah Berurah says it. Actually, I just remembered. Lamites, he says v'laseis mugmar. What's mugmar? Levona mine v'samim. It's frankincense and different types of spices. Nosnin al ha'esh, you place them over the fire. Ume'ashnin habegadim, and it kind of la'ashein comes the word to smoke, right? It kind of releases up this odor onto the clothing, or it could be onto, in this case, whatever. In this case, we're talking about clothing, but let's say you could do it with anything. They do this with the room. Right? At the end of the meal, in the time of the Mishnah, it seems that some people would sort of light mugmar in the room to
basically incense.
Yeah, it was incense, exactly. And sheyehei reicha nodef, so that the smell kind of wafts through the air, or in this, the Mishnah Berurah describes here, it's getting the clothing to have a pleasant odor. Maybe they're trying to get rid of an odor from the clothing. So that's mugmar. So you're allowed to place the mugmar, this spice over, which is now on the fire. It's all there before Shabbos, and it's wafting the entirety of Shabbos. Not a problem at all. That was all set into motion before Shabbos. And back in the Shulchan Aruch, line number 3 in my edition, V'afilu mugmar munach bekli. Even if the mugmar is in a kli. So let's say it's obviously not going to be something that's going to catch on fire. So let's say it's in a metal pot, and mugmar is doing its job. That's okay. We have no obligation to make sure that our kalim are not doing malacha on Shabbos or engaged in malacha. I'm not even sure what the malacha is here. The mugmar is just sitting in the kli, and then it's wafting. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at mem, and again, it's a very long run-on sentence. The Shulchan Aruch has of different cases. Look at mem.
When you say set it in motion before Shabbos.
Yeah, I
mean
assume
just
you put the
flames
spices.
on, or you have to put the spice thing on the flame.
I think you put the spices on the flame. Otherwise, there's a potential problem of exactly where you're sort of like you're cooking the spices. So yeah, everything's been set into motion beforehand. Then it's okay. Take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's comment in Mem. He writes, "Ba'afilu mugmar v'chulei." He says, "V'chol shekain kishamugmar munach ala haaretz d'shari." Even if let's say it's a little pit on again. We have to remember, in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara, they did not have floors like we have floors. Their floors mostly, I'm not saying there weren't places that had stone floors. Most people mostly had dirt floors, right? So they probably they could have made a little pit or something like that, and they put the coals in there, and they sprinkled the spices on top, they lit it on fire, and the whole house didn't catch on fire because the ground was made of dirt. This is why if you learn the 16th chapter of Masechah Shabbos, and they talk about when there's a fire in your house, they didn't panic quite the way that we would panic if we had a fire in our house, because they weren't maybe necessarily concerned that it would consume the entirety of the house. So they thought that there was time to get all this farm out and get all of this out. Today, I'm not so sure that we should be treating it the same way. Maybe we live in more highly flammable houses, but again, we don't have dirt floor. I think that's one of the biggest differences that we have. Okay, so all the more so again if it's on the ground there's no kli, and not like you don't even have to talk about is there shvisas kalim, because let's say your animals are not allowed to be engaged in malacha. So if your animal was somehow setting up the mugmar, let's say you trained your animal so that they know how to light a match, right? It's a problem, right? But even if the kli is doing something to help with the keep the heat high, keep the what, I don't know if that's happening. It's all fine, because again, we paskin that we don't, our kalim don't have to rest on Shabbos. Let's go back up on top now. Let's say seorin begigis lishrosa, or if you place barley into a vat to soak it. Now, what's the potential problem here of doing this? Take a look at Mem Aleph. The B'Shabbos Aser Kilakaman B'Simen Shin Lamed Vav Sif Yud Aleph Ayin Shaman. I took a look over there. What's the problem with soaking barley in water for a lengthy period of time?
Sprout.
Excellent. So I did not know this. Hinda gets the correct answer, that they will eventually sprout. And this is it's a tolda of zorea. This is it's a kind of planting. Okay, and Steve, I see your comments. It hasn't been so relevant that I will next time. I know where it is in my room. Okay, so the barley soaking is a potential problem. If I set it into motion erev Shabbos, and then over Shabbos it continues to soak, and eventually, yes, it will sprout forth after a few days. It's okay, so long as it was all set into motion before Shabbos.
In a similar vein, if somebody sends you flowers and they're delivered to your house, you really shouldn't put them in water.
Right. That's right, on Shabbos. So Hinda asked if somebody sends you flowers and they, let's say, arrive on Shabbos, is it a problem to put it into water? And the answer is yes, it's a problem to put it into water. If you put the flowers in the water before Shabbos, it's on this adorning your table, not a problem at all. But to do it on Shabbos is going to be a problem. Yes. Okay. Line 4. Back up after I have a period where it says v'toanin. Okay. V'toanin b'koras beis habad v'hagas mi'be'ojom al zeisim v'anavim v'hashemen v'hayayin hayotze mehem mutter. So if you press there's like a special beam that they would have used in the olive press or in the wine press that really, and first they squeeze it and then you really smush it and you get all the last bits of juice out, grape juice or olive oil. If you do this on Friday and then you leave the beam pressing on the grapes or the oil and it stays that way over Shabbos, then the oil and the wine that emerge from the grapes or the olives are permissible to be consumed on Shabbos. Now, there's of course a potential problem here if it were on Shabbos of schita. You're not allowed to squeeze fruit and just get the juice out plain. We will talk when we get to the laws of schita that if you were to squeeze a lemon directly onto food, it never actually gets the status of being a liquid that came out of the solid. You'll say that's the biggest cool I've ever heard. I'm just telling you the facts. The facts are that if you squeeze lemons, like you want to put lemon juice on your salad, that's okay. But you have to be careful. By the way, lemon juice into a liquid, I think, is a problem. It has to be onto a solid, if I'm not mistaken. But we're going to get to the laws of schita months from now. But I have to go back. It's in Shin Chaf, where it talks about the laws of schita. And generally speaking, again, unless you're if you're just trying to get the liquid out and it has the form of liquid when it emerges, it's a problem. That's why if you pour it immediately onto a solid directly from the lemon, let's say, it never has the status of being a liquid. But if you pour it into a cup and then pour it into the on top of the salad, that's a problem. Okay, when we get to the schita, there'll be much more of a discussion about this. But just know that this is a problematic action. If it were on Shabbos, but Erev Shabbos set into motion, it's fine. And he says, "V'ayin lekama on Siman Shin Chaf Sif Beis," and I'll just tell you, I just turned right to it. Shin, oh no, that's Shin Beis. Sorry, Shin Chaf Sif Beis. He writes, Shulchan Aruch writes over here that Zaysin v'anavim shinis raskum Erev Shabbos, that they were squeezed on Erev Shabbos. Mashkin hayotzim mehem mutarit. The liquid that comes out on Shabbos is okay. And even if you leave lo nisraskum Erev Shabbos, even if it wasn't fully crushed before Shabbos, im yesh yayin bagigis, if there's wine in the vat, the grapes are in it. Afal pisha ravim mitbakim b'Shabbos bagigis. The wine is there on Shabbos and then it falls in from the new stuff. Apparently it's okay because all the yayin that falls in is batel in the rest of the wine that's already there. Which that throws off what I was saying before. I thought that you can't I have to double check about the liquid into liquid thing. I thought that was a problem. That makes it sound like it's not a problem. But here it already says when we get to Shin Chaf, we'll see, right? It's mutter to squeeze grapes into a pot that has a tavshil, right? In order to make the taste kedela takena ha'ochel. To have a mashka habala ochel. It's lucha ochel damya. It's not mashka. We see it as ochel, as food. That's why I think if you pour it into a liquid, it's seen as a liquid. But if you pour it onto a food, it takes on the status of food.
The question is, can you squeeze a lemon into your tea?
Into your tea, which is liquid, right? Let me double check. I thought there's a problem. I thought there was a problem in squeezing it fresh.
With our tea.
Other people do. I think there's an issue of squeezing the lemon directly into liquid. But let me check. Maybe the eights I poured on squeeze it directly onto the tea bag. I don't know. I get you a little flavor of lemon. Okay. V'chein boser umelilos. If you have unripe grapes or you have grains. Shiriska mi ba'ojo. Apparently, some grains, if you squeeze, I guess the kernels of the grains, or so you crush them, you get some sort of liquid that will emerge from it. I'm not an expert. This is what the claim is here, and I assume that there's probably truth to this because I don't think Chazal made up those that they would have seen. They would have seen that happens. So mutar hamashkim hayotzim mehen. So the liquid that emerges is okay. Take a look at,
Yeah, don't you soak grain to make beer?
right,
And
so
you
that
have
it
to drain
emerges,
it.
right. There you go. So you're saying that Hinda said that you soak grains to make beer, right? And then you end up draining it. So let's say you're squeezing the grain, right? You're crushing it so that you get all the flavor out of the grain. Yeah, very good. Okay, so take a look at Mem Beis, Mem Gimel, Mem Daled, Mem Hey. Let's take a look at these comments here. The Mishnah Berurah says, "V'tonin," that you press it. V'afilu lo nisrasku mikodem. Even if, let's say, you don't completely crush the grapes or the olives prior to Shabbos, it's mutter liton. It's okay if before Shabbos you place the heavy beam on there, and now, I mean, the beginning of Shabbos, it's really pouring out. It's not just the last drops. We're talking about a lot of stuff coming out. That would be okay, he says. That's okay because it happened before sunset, as we mentioned before. But when it comes to, right, because again, on the one hand, the action has happened before Shabbos, not a problem. But he says here, the shemen and the yayin that come out of the olives and grapes, the Magen Avraham writes, the ein mutter rak im hu to'ein be'od hayom gadol. That's not mutter. That's not, it's meaning it's mutter to have the action happening, but it's not mutter, I think, to have the wine or the grapes. Sorry, the wine or the oil, olive oil on Shabbos, unless you were to'ein when there was a lot, when you lean this, you press the board, to get to squeeze the juices out. Happened the od hayom gadol, when there was not just 5 minutes before Shabbos, but a good amount of time before. Why? So what does this accomplish? Shabbos, because then this will be completely crushed before Shabbos. Al yedei te'inas hakora, by having put the beam on it well before Shabbos. And then when Shabbos is, and it's Shabbos, and let's say I take one of those leftover grape skins or olive skin, olive skin, I don't know what you call it, olive, now that has the juice, the oil out, and I squeeze it with my hands, lekachi of chatas, I will not violate it in Issur D'Oraisa because it's already squeezed. Therefore, the juice let's say the grape juice that emerges out when I squeeze, even with my fingers at that point, whatever drop or two I can squeeze out, that's all fine. The ein makom ligzor mishum schita, and this whole thing is permissible because we can't make a rabbinic zera because of the problem of schita. Aval im liton samuch ulashkia mamish. 5 minutes before shkia, for sunset, I put the beam on and it starts to squeeze the grapes, and the grape juice is really emerging. He says that and I didn't really, it's not really crushed prior to Shabbos coming in by the beams that you use to, you're probably squeezing it actively. Here, it's just the beam is resting on it on Shabbos, so it probably happens a little slower. So Asr Hamashkin Hayotze Mehen, the juice in the case of grapes, or the oil in the case of olives that emerge are prohibited. I would say at least from that Shabbos. Why? Gzeira Shema Yischot. Because we're fearful that you will take the rest of the whatever's left of the olives and the grapes, which are not fully squeezed at this point, and you will squeeze them more. So that we don't allow even to have the juice that emerges without having done that. It was just under the beam that was causing the liquid to flow. We say that that's not allowed, a rabbinic gzeira, not a deoraita here. Again, we can do these things. So on the rabbinic level, you can say that things that happen before Shabbos affect on Shabbos. We're going to have a whole simon dedicated to things related to cooking in that regard. And here's an example of a rabbinic decree that prevents you from enjoying that juice if it's not fully crushed before. Again, if you have the last few drops, it's really basically crushed, except there's a little bit that then whatever drops continue on after sunset, it's fine, no problem. drink it, use it, however you'd like. But if it's not, if it's really still in the geder of an isser of schita, the grapes or the olives are still, they have a good amount left in them, or not all of them have gotten crushed. It's a big pile, let's say, and slowly it's pushing down on them. Then you cannot use the rest of the whatever comes out on Shabbos. You cannot use that liquid. Okay.
Why are you allowed to do this in the first place? In cooking and in so many other things, the rabbinic rule is don't do it because you might be tempted to mix it or do something like that. Even with the barley, you might be tempted to mix it. You might be tempted that the piece of wood is not seated properly. You're going to move it a little bit, which you can't do on Shabbos. Why isn't that the problem?
Well, I just want to back up, but the barley is actually okay. I mean, the barley on Shabbos is a potential d'oraisa. Before Shabbos, set into motion, it's okay.
Yeah, but you might be tempted to mix it on Shabbos.
You're saying
not
why?
Okay.
So, Steve, if I understand your question correctly, you're asking why in some circumstances they say this one we're worried and the other one we're not worried.
Yeah.
I don't have a full thesis on this, but having studied some of Hilchot Shabbat, my sense is that when things are in certain circumstances that are normal, that a lot of people encounter, the rabbis were more concerned. Or I should say that they were concerned if there's a potential isser d'oraisa. So, for example, I know that you say the sa'orim could potentially is a d'oraisa, you could stir, I don't know. And once it's in the water, it's really that's the malacha. It's you put the barley in the water and now you're done. What isser can you do after that? I'm sure you could figure something out, but it's not like readily available. Here, there's a real fear that like this thing is squeezing. You're like, okay, I'm just gonna finish the rest of this myself, or since it's already coming out, I could just squeeze the rest of it. Or in the case of cooking, I have to say the pun is intended. You're playing with fire. Okay, you're playing with fire because literally the fire is on, and now you're always dealing with the potential d'oraisa by causing a sort of, let's say, moving around the coals in a certain way. It will enhance the flame, and then now suddenly you've done an isser of havara. So when there is an isser d'oraisa usually involved, then it's a problem. In fact, over here, now that you're mentioning this, the Beis Yosef mentions in the Siman that why is this a problem? Right? Because there's a potential d'oraisa waiting for you behind this. But once you've squeezed it so much that there's not a d'oraisa left anymore, but maybe only a d'rabbanan, there's only rabbinic issues left on the table here, then not a problem. The rabbis would say that it's okay, again, you shouldn't do the d'rabbanan, but if you just leave it as is, it's okay. So generally speaking, it's a d'oraisa, and I would add also a d'oraisa that may be predictable. It's a situation where you could see it. The barley is, you put the barley in and it's done. The mugmar is an interesting situation because there you have you have coals that are lit, where the spices are wafting. There it's interesting that again, if you do that before Shabbos, and they didn't make a rabbinic decree that it has to be placed in a certain this way. By cooking, you're going to allow it, but there are certain situations that have to be set up so that you will not make the mistake. The rabbis make a little extra fence, not to prevent you from cooking, but to prevent you from making the oraisa mistake.
You could be tempted to take extra spices and throw it in it.
Right. So Hinda is saying you could just easily be tempted to take the spices and throw it into the pot. You're right. That's the. There are certain.
It doesn't smell so good anymore, so used up.
Right. You want to put some more on there. Yeah. No, I hear it's I don't know that there's a perfect rule that there's going to be able to explain each and every thing, but that's I think a general rule here is that you deal with the oraisa. It's probably there's a good chance they're going to step up and say there's a problem here. Maybe with the mugmar, I'm not so familiar with mugmar. We don't have this practice today. Could be that once you sort of do it once, like that's sufficient to, cause the kalim to smell nice. But we're not worried you're going to do it a second time. I don't know. So okay. Your question is better than my answer. Anyway, but that's a general rule, but it's not. I'm admitting it's not a perfect answer.
Those of us who didn't smoke pot.
Yeah, I didn't smoke pot.
That's what it is in a sense.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Mem Gimel. The wine and the oil that come out, we said at this point was mutter. Now, of course, we qualified that already. Perush af mashiyotze b'Shabbos, even the part that comes out on Shabbos is mutter. And we don't say, we don't make a gzera that perhaps you will squeeze it, and therefore we need to make a gzera on mashkin shezavu, on the liquid that flows forth from olives and grapes, that haven't like we do in the case of shaloni strasku, where it hasn't been squeezed before Shabbos fully. When it's squeezed before Shabbos to the point where it takes away the d'oraisa, and there's still a little bit to squeeze, but this isn't the d'oraisa of schita, it's mutter. When that still exists, though, then there's the rabbinic gzeira. As we'll talk about when we get to Siman Shin Chaf Sif Aleph, the Hasam Yeshchi of Chatas. There's the oraisa to bring a sin offering in the yischot if you squeeze the grapes or olives, and that's in that state still. Alkain, therefore, they were gozer. They made a decree. Afilu bezavu me'atzman, even when it was flowing on its own, you still couldn't have it because of the potential that you, as we were talking about a moment ago, you might come and squeeze those grapes and olives which are not yet fully crushed. Afal hachak shekvar nidrasu. Here they're already crushed. Al yidei hatiina, because they were, laden with whatever the beam, whatever weight you put on them. Uvelav hache zav me'atzmo, and without that squeezing, that the further squeezing, it probably would have kind of slowly dripped out on its own anyways. So the squeezing doesn't really do you, maybe it gets it out faster, but it's already in a position where it will just continue to kind of drip and drip the rest of the way. Elashiyotzetz fei, more comes out, or maybe it comes out faster. So that's all. If you were to continue just to squeeze it with your hands to get it out quicker on Shabbos, that would only be a rabbinic issue. So that's why, so you shouldn't do that. But if you did it, it would only be a rabbinic one. Therefore, al-kain bezav me'atzaf, if it comes up by itself, the Shabbos, in that case, shari legamri, the rabbis didn't make any decrees, it would be perfectly fine. V'zehatam, and this is the reason who gam kain bevoser umalilos shebiskan. The case that follows in the Shulchan Aruch, which was the unripened grapes. And so there's very little, liquid in it. It's not, it's unripe, and I guess they saw that unripened grapes kind of left to their own, you pick it off the vine, so it's not growing anymore, left to its own accord, but probably just at some point kind of, would drip out the whatever little bit of liquid that's in it. So if that was before Shabbos, you put it on the, you put it under the thing and you put the board on it and it's slowly dripping, that's going to be okay. Okay, it's not a potential isser of schita on the oraisa. Okay, and he says, take a look at the Be'er Halacha. The ein lahater ki'im b'shidochan. It has to be crushed. That's when it's okay. Gam kain kodem Shabbos v'dicha hu yoser me risuk. And maybe it's not just risuk. Risuk is squeezed. That dicha is like mashed. Maybe it has to be really mashed for it to be mutter when it comes out. Okay. Bottom line is, it's very hard on a practical level to say that things that emerge, liquid that emerges. Now, even though the Shulchan Aruch said it was mutter, we've walked a lot of it back, and you have to be very careful about this whole situation. If you set it into motion before Shabbos, not for any d'oraisa reason, but perhaps for a d'rabbanan reason, it may not be okay to have something that squeezes juice into a cup, that you set into motion before Shabbos, unless you've really squeezed it very well. So if you have like an orange juice that you're something like that, you squeeze the oranges and it's 2-3 minutes before Shabbos, and then you kind of leave it in there and some drip happens after Shabbos starts, that's okay. But if the orange is kind of really mostly intact, even if you put it on before, a minute before Shabbos, and it's slowly squeezing over Shabbos, since it started Shabbos still in a state where you could have violated a d'oraisa, we don't allow the liquid that comes from it to be consumed. Okay. Hopefully on to more practical things here in a moment. Mem Dalet. V'chein boser anovim b'tchilasan kishein dakim. When the unripened grapes you start to at the beginning, they're very thin, and they some motzilehen mashke letabel babasar. What do we use the liquid for? Maybe to dip some meat into it, some little flavoring. The fishu chazak v'karov lachmitz. Nobody would want to drink the unripened liquid that comes out of the grapes. It's more that you would use it in the cooking process. He's just giving us information about what makes this different than regular grapes. It's just here that you wouldn't drink the juice. You would use it in cooking. It's more like it's chazak. It's like a little bit like it's a little vinegary. Umelilos shibolin. These are stalks of grain. Shalo bashlu, that they did not fully ripen. Cold sarkon all the way. Maraskan v'tornim ba'avanim. So you kind of crush these unripened grains underneath the rocks. Mashke zav mehen, and there is some sort of liquid that emerges from them. Umetabelbo, and you might use it as a dip, as a something that you're not consuming it plain. You're putting it on something else. Okay, that's boser melilos. And so we caught up with that. Take a look back in the Shulchan Aruch. He says, "Umuter lo seis chitim lesoch rechaim shalmayim samuch lachashechem." It is permissible to place wheat kernels in a water mill prior to Shabbos, of course, close to dark. And so therefore on Shabbos, right, how does a water mill work? I'm not an expert, but I've been to miniature golf and I've seen them, and the water pours onto the one thing and it keeps it moving, right? And slowly. So again, you're allowed to set that into motion. You turn the water on before Shabbos, right? You open up, you set it into motion, and the water mill keeps going around. And so what happens? You put the wheat kernels in prior to Shabbos, and throughout the entirety of Shabbos, slowly but surely, the wheat kernels are getting ground up. So this is, according to the Shulchan Aruch, going to be permissible. Now, by the Oraisa law, it should be fine, because again, you set this into motion before Shabbos. Take a look at Mem Vav and Mem Zayin. La says chitim v'hu adin shemuter az ba'atzmo liftoch gam kein es hamizgeres shel mayim shal yedei zeh tochanin b'harichaim. Obviously, it's permissible as well to turn on to open up the mizgeres shel hamayim, the part that that helps the water come in to help it start to turn around. That's what it's talking about. You open up the faucet, the valve, exactly. And because of this, the mill will work and it will grind. Okay, as long as it's before Shabbos. Mem Zayin shel mayim v'lo shel behema. You can't have an animal, let's say, think about like a hamster here, who's not literally a hamster, but think about like a wheel like that, where you have an animal that's walking in some way, and because of their movements, it keeps pulling the mill. Even if let's say you set that into motion before Shabbos, and your animal, 5 minutes before Shabbos, it starts doing its job, and then it continues into Shabbos. You can't let that happen once Shabbos starts, because shvisas behemto is a d'oraisa. It says in the Torah that your animal must rest on Shabbos for malacha, particularly in a situation where the malacha is clearly a benefit to you. If the animal goes off on its own and it starts to, lighting a match because they want to smoke a cigarette, I don't know, that's your animal's problem. It's not my problem, right? But here your animal is doing your work for you, even though you didn't tell the animal on Shabbos or signal to the animal on Shabbos. Your animal cannot do malacha for you. Sorry. The Ramah here though adds this is very interesting. We're not going to fully be able to spell out this whole issue, but this of course is going to touch on the idea of a Shabbos alarm clock, and you have a Shabbos alarm clock. So that's a mill. What happens with a mill? It's not exactly the quietest activity. If you have a mill that's going around and around with little kernels and it's grinding it up, that's making a loud noise. So the Ramah writes here, first opinion, he says, kind of the continuation of the Shulchan Aruch's opinion, is velo chayshina lahashmas kol. We're not worried about the noise that emerges from the mill over Shabbos. Shiyomer, that people are going to say rechaim shel ploni, Yankala's rechaim, Yankala's mill, tochanos b'Shabbos is grinding on Shabbos. What a Machal Shabbos? Look at that. He's grinding, wheat kernels on Shabbos. No, so for the first opinion is not concerned about this issue. But the second, and maybe even the second opinion is not particularly particularly concerned about this. But let's take a look. The second opinion is v'yesh osrim b'rechaim. Some say no, the mill is not allowed on Shabbos, even if you set it into motion before Shabbos. Uv'chol makom sheyesh lochush lahashma askol, because you should always be concerned about hashma askol, about noise, loud noises that emerge on Shabbos, that's something that you set into motion. It says this is lachatchila what we should do. We should be careful about loud noises that we set into motion before Shabbos. Mihu b'makom seda. Of course, if there's a great loss or something like that, yesh lahakel. As we commotion is bar le'el sof sim and reish mem dal. We've talked about this in the past when there's great financial loss potentially, so there's room to be lenient because you have one opinion here that clearly says it's permissible, but the second one does not like this. I'm just going to read the rest of the Ramah here, and then we're going to go back to the previous part of the discussion here, though I'm going to set off a discussion probably that won't get finished today, so I apologize, but it's good to think about things even if we don't have all the information quite yet. So mutar lahamid kli mishkoles. You're allowed to place a weighted a vessel that has weights. Shikorin zigger, that is called a zigger, which is a sha'on. So you have a clock that goes, and it's got weights. Remember those things that you pull it back and then it goes, and it hits the other marble and it goes there. So you have a thing that's going back and forth, and it was a clock that worked by weights, right? And it makes noise, right? And probably not a tight. It makes a good clop every time the weight hits the other one. So you have some sort of clock that's doing this. Can you set the zigger before Shabbos? The answer is apparently yes. Even though it will make noise to tell you what time it is on Shabbos. Sounds familiar? Like a grandfather clock that on the hour goes, what's that noise it makes? It makes like a louder noise, on the hour, right? Everybody knows that it was set before Shabbos, right? So no one's gonna think, but a Machal Shabbos, he banged his clock. No, everyone knows that's how you set a clock. Clock is set ahead of time, and therefore
no one would be tempted to adjust the clock.
No adjustment on the clock, and nobody would be fearful of that, or no one would say, Plony, clearly did this on Shabbos. Clearly did this before Shabbos. That's not something you would have done, on the day. You set those. They probably have to wind these things up, I assume, so that the weights every so often they probably have to wind it up and then set it back into motion, and then the pendulum would swing, and then it gets to the top of the hour, and it makes some sort of noise. I don't know how they is that always how it was, without like the. I guess it would go. How would they create the noise at the top of the hour? Like it happens. Like
Mechanical thing.
It's a mechanical thing. It just sort of sets it into motion. The mechanical thing, and the bird comes out and okay, okay. So let's look at the Mishnah Berurah here very quickly. Here, look at one comment here, Memches, and then we'll stop. When we call v'kol makom, this is going on the point that it should be prohibited. The rechaim kol al bazeh kol kayotze bazeh hamashmiya kol. Wrapped up in all this is anything that's very similar to the mill, which creates a loud noise. The avsha milsa, the ika zilusa l'shabsa. It's the avsha milsa. It's like this is a noisy situation. And it says it's a zilusa l'shabsa. It's like it's ruining Shabbos. It's making loud noises. It doesn't feel like Shabbos. It feels like you're at a factory. So it's not we're not talking about the doraisa here. We're talking about a rabbinic decree, that sort of keeps the sanctity of Shabbos. Ukamoshe Kosav V'Darki Moshe, as the Rav Moshe Isserles writes in his work that was written on the side of the page of the Beis Yosef. If the mill is owned by a non-Jew, then it's okay, it's fine. I put the wheat in there beforehand. It's owned by a non-Jew. No one's going to think Yankel the Jew did this because Yankel doesn't own this mill. Okay, if let's say you rent out the business, your mill or something like that, to the non-Jew, apparently that's also okay. I guess people will or no, he's skiro. Oh no, so you're renting it out to the non-Jew. Apparently that's also okay. I guess we're not fearful there that people will think a certain thing, that people will know that, you've rented this out. There was a whole sim we talked about at the beginning of Hilchot Shabbat about what situations is it normal, what's abnormal. If it's normal to have such an arrangement, then we're not worried about the perception. But if it's abnormal, then we are worried about the perception. Okay. Let's say the Jew gave the non-Jew the grains before Shabbos. You do it for me. And then the non-Jew does it on Shabbos. So that's permissible b'kotzas, as long as it's a situation where you've hired the person properly, you made an arrangement where you don't have to do this on Shabbos, you pay them for the job. And then the non-Jew is doing it, timing-wise, they're doing it whenever they want. Just the Jew shouldn't stand there the whole Shabbos next to him while he's doing it. Just because then you look like he's just you're doing it as his agent. He's your agent, as we'll talk about in Shin Zayin, standing next to a non-Jew when it comes to things related to business. You start so it's Yom Tov, let's say the stock market is open, and I'm not trading. I just keep telling him what to do, right? And he does all the trading. So that's we're going to talk about that when we get to Shin Zayin. You can't do stuff like that. One thing that's relevant to today. Let's say it's the Shabbos before Pesach and your strites or your Manischewitz. I'm sure strites and Manischewitz don't do this actually, but let's say you're in a little town where you're the guy who makes matzah for everybody, right? And it's getting close to Pesach, so I give it to the non-Jew, do the So then mutali Yisrael lios omed sham liros shlot yischametz. The Jew is allowed to stand there as a mashgiach, not as the telling you what to do business wise. My job is simply to make sure that it doesn't turn into chametz. I'm a mashgiach. The Aruch HaShulchan says it's okay to be a mashgiach. You want to ensure the sort of the kashrus of the situation. That's okay, but I have nothing to do. I'm not talking to you about anything related to the business, to how you do your job. I'm just watching for chametz. You can also place a guard there to make sure nothing gets stolen, right? Not about business, just make sure it doesn't get stolen. You can't talk any business. No business talk. As we talked about previously. Okay, can't talk business. Okay. Now it's interesting here. There's an interesting situation that's related to this whole issue of avsha milsa. There's this noises. What about your laundry or your dryer? Let's say you did your laundry, right? Now you put it in the dryer, and it's 3 seconds before Shabbos, and you want I'll set it into motion before Shabbos. It'll dry on Shabbos. Obviously, I could do that on Shabbos, but if I set it into motion beforehand, is it a problem? So, in my comments here of the Dirshu edition, they write, let's say you turn on the laundry machine, not the washing machine, not the dryer. We'll talk about the dryer in a second. It will continue to work by itself on Shabbos. But if if you have my washing machine moves on its own and makes noise and makes its presence very, very much felt. So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach apparently had a very similar one to me. I feel very holy. So Shlomo Zalman said, you can't turn on the washing machine 3 minutes before Shabbos. I would say here on my own that if you turn it on, let's say 20, 25 minutes before, where it's legitimately could probably finish, it's hard to sometimes predict how long the cycle will be, but legitimately it could have finished before Shabbos, then it's okay, I think. But he says here, Rav Shlomo Zalman writes, Harei zeh kerechaim. This is like the case of the Rechaim, right? And we lechatchila don't allow this. It's a rabbinic decree that just sort of says that this is not Shabbos. You shouldn't have machines, or loud noises happening in your house that makes you feel like you're in a factory. And in the Shelos Chuvos of the Igros Moshe, Rav Moshe Feinstein writes, what about Mechonas Yavush, the dryer? He says, same thing. Dryer makes too much noise if you turn the dryer on a minute before Shabbos. So it's not, he says, it's not right. It's not right. You shouldn't do it. But of course, if it's a Shas Adchak, you need either some sort of clothing that you're going to need after Shabbos, not on Shabbos. And then the halacha happening on Shabbos is the problem, remember? And especially Rav Moshe thinks that machines are like a non-Jew. Remember, he didn't like the timers, right? So if you set it into, so anyways, but if let's say you need just like something for a function right after Shabbos, is a great need. Okay, fine. So he allows it in a great need situation. The Chazon Ish says, what about a generator that makes a lot of noise? He says the generator is fine. You know why? Because if you didn't have a generator, you have no power. So that's why it's mutter. But he says here, She'emekach Isra Shmas Kol Shekevan Shaderach Mihila Ha'amido Ulechavono Me'erev Shabbos. Everyone knows you set the generator up before Shabbos. Nobody's thinking that the generator always is working. A dryer is not always working. So there's no zilzul kavod Shabbos. It's not, also it's not even about the noise, it's about the perception of like, oh, maybe you did this a little bit on, like you did it on Shabbos, right? So it's a zilzul in a few different directions. Number one is the noise, and it's also like, what are people thinking? There are two things going on here, I think.
So do we understand this as a problem of noise or using the dryer? So the GE no noise dryer.
Yeah. By the way, I would venture to say that if you ask a posek, I'm not a posek here in the situation. I would venture to say there might be room to say that that's okay, because I think the answer here, the issue is, the Isser is even called Hashma Askol. It's about the noise that emerges, and it creates a certain, I think, environment that's a problem. And I don't think, especially when you're talking about a quiet dryer that literally doesn't make noise. Yeah, maybe. It's a question. I'll try to remember to ask, Rabbi Weider when next time I speak to him. Just curious, because that would seem to be okay here. If you just follow the logic. Okay, we'll stop here. We will talk about the zigger next time and how this plays into Shabbos alarm clocks, which I think, based on what we've even read, should be fine, right? If you set a Shabbos alarm, no one's going to think suddenly, you turn this on right now. If it's like goes off one time, that's what an alarm clock is. An alarm clock is always set ahead of time, right? That's the very nature of the whole thing. Okay, very good. And then we'll talk about the last piece here that relates a little bit to some to the issues of tefillin on Shabbos, and we're getting close to Reish Nun Gimel, which is going to be all the laws of how to prepare food for Shabbos. Next week, we're not going to meet. It's Pesach. I wish everybody a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. And I know Hinda will be here. Steve, are you local or you're local? I know you're here, right?
I will be here.
You'll be here. I know, Bella, you're down in Florida. Have a Chag Kasher v'Sameach.
Yes. We're thinking about you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Klinger. The best.
Thank you. Have a
Chag
great.
Kasher v'Sameach.